So in continuation with the chapter Industrialization, the age of industrialization, today we are going to start with the topic on page number 119, that is, where did the workers come from? So till more students are joining, I'll just give you a little brief about what we read yesterday. We had read about the entrepreneurs, that the industries were now being set up in India as well. And as a result, somewhere or the other, trade and prosperity through industrialization started coming to India as well. Before that, we know that the Britishers were working only to promote the industries in England, and the raw material was being taken from India and the finished goods were also same. So it doesn't matter one or two sentences, pages here or there in between. That's why I'm giving the briefing also now, that this is what we read in those pages, right? And of course, we know that when the factories were coming up, with that, we had the requirement of workers also. So workers used to come from the neighboring areas, clear? Neighboring areas where the factories were being established or the industry was being established, clear? So now we know, we have read about the trading towns. In 7th standard, you have read about the trading towns, clear? And we know that textile industry, especially the textile industry which was coming up at that time, required more labor. And we had surplus population in India and labor was cheap. So when we will talk about the establishing of industry in India, especially textile industry in Maharashtra, so we will see that from where the workers came to work, right? And today this we are going to discuss. So now I'll further, where did the workers come from? That is in my book on page number 119. So you can check the topic. This is 4.2. Topic 4.2. Where did the workers come from? Right? So factories needed workers. Obviously, the machines could not work independently. So the factories required the workers. With the expansion of factories, the demand increased. That is, more and more workers were required. In most of the industrial regions, worker frame came from the districts around. Obviously, that is one of the requirements of establishing the industries, that besides the other requirement of water, electricity, clear, good roads, transport and communication, it is also very important that worker is available from nearby. If the worker is not available from nearby, so hiring workers will also become expensive, because workers, if the workers will come from far off places, naturally they cannot commute daily, clear? And what they have to do, they have to stay over there. So they need housing facility over there, right? They will require food also. So that is why whenever we talk about industrialization, side by side, we talk of urbanization as well. That's why we always say that industrialization and urbanization always happen side by side, because the industries cannot exist in isolation. Somewhere network problem can be there. So check your network also, doesn't matter. So the problem can be the industries cannot exist in isolation. So what do they need? They obviously need workers. Okay. So let's read further. Peasants and artisans who found no work in the villages went to industrial centers in search of work. over 50% of workers in Bombay cotton industries in 1911 came from the neighboring districts of Ratnagiri. Clear? So it is one of the districts in Maharashtra, and it is a very famous port town. Clear? Ratnagiri. We all know that Bombay, Maharashtra itself is a coastal state, and Ratnagiri is also a very famous port town. So when we say port town, so you must understand now that it means that it helps in export and import. Clear? Transactions takes place from, trading happens from here, and it has many famous places, tourist attractions also. Mahabaleshwar is also one of the famous places which comes in this district, and it is also the birthplace of Lokmanya Tilak. While the mills of Kanpur is in, yes, who can tell? Hurry up and write in the chat box. Kanpur is in which state? Yes, Kanpur is in which state? Hurry up. Let's see the answer. Yes, right. It is in UP, Uttar Pradesh, Kanpur. And Kanpur is also famous. Yes, yes. Okay, good for the response I've got. Right, all right. So Kanpur is also famous for leather goods. It is one of the most famous centers for leather goods. Got most of their textile hands from the villages within the districts of Kanpur. So in and around the areas where the factories were coming up, the labor was also available. Most often mill workers moved between the village and the city and returning to their villages home during harvest and festivals. So most of the time they would try and find a lodging there, those who could come from nearby areas, but those who were staying here would return to their villages during harvest or festivals. So we all know this, we have discussed so many times that sowing and harvesting requires more number of labor. Yesterday also we have discussed about the seasonality of such occupations in the sector of agriculture and in the manufacturing sector as well. And we know at that time, agriculture was one of the most common occupation, and people were doing agriculture for sustenance. And with this read that with agriculture, people were taking up additional works to supplement the income. Next is over times, as news of employment spread, workers traveled great distances in the hope of work in the mills from the United Provinces. Now at that time, what was the United Provinces? Yeah, United Provinces were the area which comprised of the Uttar Pradesh, present Uttar Pradesh, and Uttarakhand. Clear? So that was called as United Provinces. Probably that's why Uttar Pradesh. For instance, they went to work in the textile mills of Bombay and in the jute mills of Calcutta. And jute, of course, we know that it's a long process. You have already read about jute in agriculture. Clear? And both textile and jute mills and industries are labor-intensive industries. You have the example of JCT in your own city. So you know that how many shifts are there, and you often see labor entering or leaving the JCT mills. Now on the next page, on page number 120, getting jobs was always difficult. This also we have read yesterday. So I'm just reminding you that when so many people in large number were coming to the cities, industrialized cities, so it was not necessary that everybody could get a job. And we know that those who had relatives or those who had some contacts, they could get the jobs easily as in comparison to others. Even when mills multiplied and the demand of workers increased, the numbers seeking work were always more than the jobs available. So this problem we are facing now also in India, we were facing at that time also. And again, I explained this to you that the rise in the population population is not in the proportion to the resources which are available to us. So that is why this cannot match until and unless we do not control the population, we will not be able to match the availability of opportunities for job seekers. Clear? This will always be there, that there will be less number of jobs as compared to the number of people who are seeking work. ठीक है? हम कहते हैं ना अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट और एम्प्लॉयमेंट की डेफिनेशन क्या होती है, किया है ना हमने, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट की डेफिनेशन की है आपने इकोनॉमिक्स में, दैट दोज पीपल हु आर हैविंग अ क्वालिफिकेशन और हु आर रेडी टू वर्क, सीकिंग, SEEKING, seeking work, but are unable to get work. Okay, so let's see further. The numbers seeking work were always more than the jobs available. Entry into the mills was always restricted. Industrialists usually employed a jobber to get new recruits. Now, who's a jobber? Jobber is a person who was employed by the industrialists. Industrialists means those who own the industry. जो मालिक थे industries के, those who were the owners, they would employ these people to bring in the workers as per the requirement of the industry. Very often the jobber was an old and trusted worker. So as a person was working in the organization or in the industry, and the industrialists or the owner could trust them. Clear? So often this job, which job? Job of recruiting new workers for the industry was assigned to the jobber. He got people from his village, ensured them jobs, helped them to settle in the city, and provided them money at the time of crisis. So what he would do? Further, he would bring those people who were known to him. ठीक है, जो उसकी जान पहचान के लोग होते थे, and generally from the areas where he belonged to, and as a result, what he would do, he would help them to settle in the cities or in the areas where that industry was located. He would ensure them jobs, help them to settle in the city, and provided them money in the time of crisis. Suppose that job could not be there. He has called 20 to 30 people from his village, or he has 15 people from his village. But at that time, suddenly there is requirement of only 12 people. So those 3 people who are still waiting to be employed, so the jobber would help them also. Because why crisis? What kind of a crisis? That people could not earn or they could not find a suitable job. The jobber therefore became a person with some authority and power. So naturally, when they had such important responsibility, so this jobber became a person with a lot of importance, because he was always at the center of where those people who were unemployed and were seeking employment. So suddenly they become very important people. They became very important people, and they would show some authority and power as well. He began demanding money and gifts for his favor and controlling the life of the workers. So first, I told you yesterday also, we have discussed this in the class, that how first we are lured. Okay, LURED. हमें एक झांसा देके फंसाया जाता है, ल्योर किया जाता है, and when we become bound by that, so then we have no other way to go out. ठीक है, हम उसको छोड़ नहीं सकते हैं. Somewhere or the other we become so dependent on that person, as we have done that those who are small farmers, landless peasants, when they did not have any work of their own. Clear? We have done these examples so many times, that how these farmers, they became dependent. I'm telling you the example, that they became dependent on landlords. because they have taken money as loan from them in the form of loan. Okay. So similarly, these jobbers, they became people of authority. They had extra money, clear, and they would help to find them work. So as a result, they started exploiting the situation. Exploiting the situation means that the situation is that the workers, right? The workers, they now were dependent on the jobber, and the jobber took full advantage of this situation. The number of factory workers increased over time. However, as you will see, there were a small proportion of the total industrial workforce. अब जैसे जैसे लोगों को पता लगने लगा, right, that more work was available in the towns where industries were coming up. So there was a large rush of people towards the cities. Next, on page 121, the peculiarities of industrial growth. Peculiarities means that some feature which brings our attention towards that. Okay. The European managing agencies, which dominated industrial production in India, were interested in certain kinds of products. They established tea and coffee plantations. We have already read about the plantation type of agriculture, acquiring land at cheap rates from the colonial government, and they invested in mining indigo and jute. So this also, indigo and jute, we know already, we have read. Indigo you have read in 8th standard, and we know that why the Britishers were interested in growing, because that was required as a raw material for the industries in Britain, and the farmers who were growing indigo were not able to grow the other food crops because the soil would lose its nutrient value for a long time, and as a result, this also became a big drawback for the Indian people for being poor in the rural areas. Most of these were products required primarily for export trade and not for sale in India. So as I was telling you already, that these were mainly because at that time still Britishers were controlling, and now we know that the Britishers had social, political and economic control over India completely. So therefore, what was to be produced, where it was to be produced, how, and what was the requirement was also decided by the British, but that was in favor of the British and not of the Indian farmers. When Indian businessmen began setting up industries in the late 19th century, they avoided competing with the Manchester goods. So Manchester is a city in Britain. It is said to be the center from where actually the industrial revolution started. It is one of the most industrialized and urbanized city, clear? So that is why we refer to in journal Manchester goods. Manchester goods refers to those products which were being produced in the industries which were set up in Manchester. In the Indian market, since yarn was not an important part of British exports into India, imports into India, the early cotton mills in India produced porous cotton yarn thread. Yarn refers to thread rather than fabric. When yarn was imported, it was only for the superior variety. The yarn produced in Indian spinning mills was used by handloom weavers in India or exported to China. So we have already studied this, that in Britain, the demand was for fine quality of cotton, clear? And the coarse quality of cotton, which was produced in the handloom industry in India, was more of demand in India or was exported to China. By the first decade of the 20th century, a series of changes affected the pattern of industrialization. As the Swadeshi movement gathered momentum, we have already done the non-cooperation of the civil disobedience movement. So it's in reference to that. As the Swadeshi movement gathered momentum, nationalists mobilized people to boycott foreign goods. We have read picketing of the foreign shops and burning bonfires of the foreign goods. Industrial groups organize themselves to protect their collective interest, pressurizing the government to increase tariff protection and grant other concessions. We know that by the different groups, that is the industrialists, the workers, the businessmen, had joined the civil disobedience movement. From 1906, moreover, the export of Indian yarn to China declined since produce from Chinese and Japanese mills flooded the Chinese market. So industrialists in India began shifting from yarn to cloth production. Okay, yarn to cloth. Yarn is the material from which cloth is woven. कपड़ा, धागा. उससे पहले रॉ, सबसे पहले फिर हम धागा बनाते हैं, फिर उसको हम वीव करते हैं क्लियर कपड़ा बनाने के लिए. So from yarn to cloth production. Cotton piece goods production in India doubled between 1900 to 1912. Yet till the First World War, 1914, we have already studied in India's struggle for freedom. We have done the effects of the First World War on the Indian political scene, social and economic. What were the effects of the First World War? Yet till the First World War, industrial growth was slow. The war created a dramatically new situation. Now, why dramatically new situation? We know that हमने glut के बारे में भी पढ़ लिया कि बहुत ज़्यादा production हो रही थी. What was happening in India industrial scene? What was happening in England? Now, suddenly, why it dramatically changed? Because the war brought with it some sudden demand. Sudden demands and requirements. Okay.